Hello and welcome to UKAuthority Live, Making Digital Policing a Reality with me, Helen Olsen Bedford. Our police forces are facing a period of significant challenge with pressure from all sides, reduced budgets, diverse communities with increasingly complex needs, coupled with, of course, rising volumes of cybercrime and terror threats. Harnessing technology as a transformation tool offers a welcome potential to meet these challenges. Consequently, the Police Chiefs Council's National Enabling Programmes and the Police ICT Company are working together to drive forward the use of digital and commodity technologies in support of the Policing Vision 2025. One interesting focus of this work is on harnessing commodity technologies that meet common needs rather than the disparate bespoke approach of the past. Joining me today to discuss this work are Simon Parr, Business Change Lead at the National Enabling Programmes and ex-Chief Constable from Cambridgeshire Police. Jules, CIO at Essex and Kent Police, Chris Doutney, Executive Director at Civica Digital, and Richard Thwaite, ex-CIO of the Met and currently leading on the IT landscape mapping for the National Police Chiefs Council. As ever, we invite you to put questions through to our panel via the facility on your screen. Please add your name and organisation to any questions. So, general question, let's go from the top. When to bespoke and when to commoditise? Is there a core commonality? Jules?
I think historically police forces have done bespoke far too much. In my two forces we have 260 different IT applications.
Wow.
And it is a very fractured, disparate landscape with a number of national IT systems run primarily by the Home Office, and then really free range for every force to do what they want at local level. And change is on the turn, and this is starting to improve. But it's been a long time coming and brings massive problems around interoperability and sharing data in the meantime.
I think one of the challenges has been in the past, people have procured technology who decided they needed to buy a new system because they had a new thing to do. And we haven't looked nationally at the fact that what we should be concentrating on is what information do we need and where does it need to go.
Richard?
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was at the Met Police, we looked at our whole processes, our business technology processes to support policing, and my background was primarily private sector before coming into policing, and so one of the things I was looking at was the whole process and how it worked, and to me it seemed fundamentally like a CRM solution, a customer relationship management solution. It's just in the private sector we call it prospect to sale, and in policing we call it suspect to jail. But it's fundamentally the same process.
Chris, what about from the other side?
I think from our point of view, we work with clients across an array of public services, and including the police service. And I think in our experience, it's the 80-20 rule, really. You understand what it is you're trying to achieve in terms of business processes and information management strategy, and then basically you look at the COTS platforms, the platforms that are available, and if 80% of the requirements met by that, why would you bespoke? You'd be mad going forward.
Do you think there is that commonality there, Simon?
Yes, of course there is. At the heart of this, policing has got to get used to the idea that it's not different. What it does is different. What it does is really significant in terms of impacting on people's lives. But actually, what policing does with information is no different to any other business. It collects it, it aggregates it, it puts rules around it, it has rules around who can see things, and it makes decisions that somebody has to go and do something. And if 90% of the world's businesses that have survived and thrived over the last 10 to 15 years through all the economic challenges they've faced say we can commoditise, we can now move information across continents in different time zones so that it's in the hands of the people that need to use it, then policing can do the same, particularly when you look, we're actually quite a small geography, we've got the same time zone, there aren't that many of us in policing. We should be able to move information across the borders without people worrying about needing to sort of build interfaces and waste money.
Richard, how do you overlooking the IT landscape mapping, is that looking at all the things that are happening for the Police Chiefs Council?
Yes, absolutely. So we're looking at all the different national programmes that are taking place, because there's been a recognition over the last few years that really it doesn't make sense for individual police forces to take on board and transform the technology landscape within each force without thinking about it on a more national level. So we've been able to pull out a number of initiatives across policing in conjunction with some Home Office programmes that are taking place, some major transformation programmes in the Home Office around the PNC, PND replacement, for example, around biometrics, and of course around the airwave replacement, ESMCP. And so then joining those up with policing initiatives to see how we can build that national picture. And coming back to Simon's point, for me, if you look at the private sector, if you take Marks and Spencer's for example, or any kind of retail chain like that, they don't allow each store to go off and build their own point of sale solution. That doesn't make sense, or their own stock ordering. But they do allow the store managers to configure the store in terms of what they sell. And that's really, for me, the goal for policing is we don't want to say to a chief constable, you have to operate in this specific way, because every force is different, the way whether it's more rural, more metropolitan. And so we want to allow the chief constables and the police forces the flexibility to police the way they want to police. But actually the underlying and the underpinning technology and core processes should be fundamentally the same.
Jules?
It's really important, though, that the IT solutions are agile enough to accommodate the local requirements for different demands and pressure. They've really improved in the last few years, but 10 years ago we had some big national systems, the days of the NSPIS, things with case custody and HR, and they were just based on big mainframes at Hendon. They were took 2 years to program and produce, and were so convoluted and tortuous to change that people lost faith in them. Whereas now there's a real demand for agility and meeting local demands and in changing crimes, and the IT systems have to be able to cope with that.
I think one of the things that Richard's just said there is really significant, because the variety of uses to which people want to put these systems is exactly the reason why we should be commoditising, using what industry builds. You know, the big providers of systems across the world don't provide different systems for small business and large business. They provide scalability and they provide connectivity. And that's what policing has missed, and that's why people have bought their own things, and they've thought in silos inside their own organisation and isolated themselves from their neighbours. And the commoditisation of using off-the-shelf stuff allows you to get rid of those internal and external boundaries, whilst not dictating what you have to do with the information you've got.
From the supplier's point of view, though, Chris, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, obviously, I'm sure there are suppliers out there that like everybody to bespoke everything, but what's your view?
I think it's a good thing, because the words that Richard used, that Simon used, scalability and reliability, are the fundamental things. So you look at something like a Dynamics 365 or an Office 365, they're global platforms that have got a huge array of functionality in them that is common. A lot of investment's gone into them. You can tap into that investment, but they're also highly configurable, and that's the beauty of them. Basically, you get all of the functionality. They're good on things like information audit, which is fundamentally important. You don't want to go and bespoke and rebuild all of that if you've got the capability built in there. They've got, Office 365's got this advanced data governance stuff built into it now, which is really fundamentally important, helps you manage records all the way through. Yep. So why wouldn't you use that and then tailor as required to specific requirements? Configure.
Jules,
seems logical to me.
It's a good question. How, from the front line, obviously you're current CIO of Essex and Kent, what's the view from the front line? Do they feel that way? Would they agree with that, or do they want to be all different? Is there a cultural element here?
I think there's still a cultural element about wanting good IT now, and if it's quicker to do it in-house in your own force, that's what's wanted. But I think the tide's changing quite rapidly, and as we're bringing in big solutions such as Office 365, it's similar to consumer technology that people use at home every day. It has the usability and the interfaces that they expect. So that mindset is changing slowly, but it will take time.
The thing I would add to that as well is I think the opportunity around this is around mobile apps, because if you can build that core platform and the infrastructure, Simon was talking about the analytics, and then as Jules said, you want the flexibility on top of that. So that's where, to me, the mobile working and apps play such a key role, because with apps you can configure things very quickly. You can make an app look like the way the Essex and Kent police want it to look, versus in Cambridgeshire you can make it look different. But fundamentally underneath, it's tapping into the same data, provided you have the standards, and that's what I think is really key. And for me, the big challenge around all this is developing the standards and things like open APIs across the vendors who provide the solutions. If you can build that in, then you can allow that flexibility to sit on top through apps and mobile working.
Actually, talking about mobile, because you took Cambridgeshire Mobile, didn't you, Simon, when you were Chief Constable there?
We did. I mean, I shied away from the word mobile, because I think mobility, to a certain extent, is I've got my desk on wheels, and you do outside what you used to do internally. And we talk much more about digitisation, and Richard and I have spoken lots over I don't know how many years now about this. But actually, entering data once and a multiple reuse, using the tools that are available now, you can do that. You can do it on a watch, you can do it on a phone, you can do it on a slate, you can do it on a tablet. The delivery system is dependent on where you need it and what you happen to be doing. But actually, at the heart of it is, and so saying the app, it's a lean, it uses few resources, it's kind to a battery, all those sorts of things, and you can render that for the screen size and for the functionality you want. But at the heart of this is we have a digital platform which stores information once and makes much more use of it, which again makes it available to other people that need to see it. The cultural journey was interesting in Cambridgeshire in terms of saying, right, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you all the information you need. And the impact on middle managers is quite dramatic because they suddenly aren't in charge of what people know and they aren't in charge of what people see. And you have to start to learn to trust your organisation. And we used to talk about the corporate dissonance, which says we empower some of our youngest police officers in particular to go out and do some of the most extreme things, deprive someone of their liberty, for example, but we don't allow them to hit the enter keys and give them the information to do it. So allowing that information to flow through an organisation deals with some of the issues that Jules talks about, saying, I want it now. And if you give it to them in a commoditised fashion, it's something they're familiar with. But it's I think, easy to underestimate what happens to an organisation when you just allow information to flow through it. It changes a lot of your formal structures, but a lot of the informal ones as well. And that's where some of the change management process needs to come in. You can't just drop it on and explode it. You need to allow it to sort of work its way through your business gently. And that starts from the top. The change in working practices from people who might be doing the same thing roughly 15 to 20 years out of a 30-year career is something that needs managing as well.
Which is obviously why you're leading on the behavioural change aspect on the enabling programmes, having done all of that. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, I was going to cite an example in the Met where a very similar situation occurred because the Met, again, has a very strong culture and Bernard Hogan Howe, the commissioner at the time, created a group of younger officers who he called the Commissioners 100, who he encouraged to challenge the police, the Met, how to do things differently and how to use technology. And they were very challenging, I can assure you. As a CIO at the time, they would come and challenge me and say, why have you got such rubbish systems? And I have to admit, yes, we did have pretty rubbish systems. But one of the things that they were saying was they wanted more mobile working, the ability to use apps and so on. And so we used them to help us design the solutions that we offered. But coming back to the cultural point, what struck me was we provided iPad minis out in Hammersmith and Fulham. We gave 500 to the officers on the front line, the patrol officers. And we tracked them and they were using them for evidential witness statements and other day-to-day activities. And after about 6 weeks, we did a survey to see how they were getting on with them. And we surveyed each shift, and there was three shifts each day, and we came back. We had about 12 shift team responses, and I think 9 of the shift teams were extremely positive. They were sort of over 4 out of 5, very, very happy, extremely happy, and then 2 or 3 were very, very low scoring. So we tried to get to the bottom. Well, what was that big difference? And we asked the ones who'd scored it low, and we said, well, why did you score this low? They said, oh, well, our inspector told us not to bother using this because it's never going to catch on. So we never really used them. And that was fascinating. And the teams where the inspectors said, yeah, this is great, you should use it, it's going to really help you, they did, they loved it. But those where the inspector said, don't bother, this is a waste of time, it's all going to go away in a few months.
I'm not surprised.
You know, and that's the cultural challenge you've got to deal with. It's not just about technology or giving great technology, it's about helping change the culture as well.
Leadership rather than technology, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you guys work with police, but you also work with other sectors, public and private. Is that cultural shift of getting people to adopt, is that any different from any programme?
No, fundamentally important. If you're going to transform an organisation, you need to understand the processes that are in play, and often, you know, there are the written processes and then the informal processes that everybody uses to get around the written processes. You need to understand that environment, but you absolutely need commitment and leadership from the top to drive these things through, and kind of leading from the front to demonstrate that if you're expecting other people to do that, then you should do the same thing.
One of the commodity things that we found was quite strange is that people were almost wanting something different. Well, that means I'm at work, and actually giving them something was exactly how their home stuff worked. So, well, hang on a minute, this is what I do. This is home, and it took a while to get people to recognise that the benefit, of course, is they know how to use it. You know, you don't go and get a mobile phone from the shop on the high street and have a week's course. You just give it to them, so I go and play with it, find out how it works, use it. And some of that change, there was a kind of a counterculture there. Well, hang on, I know I want something different that's just for policing, and that took us a while to break down.
Jules, where does the drive, the push come from? Do you get like the younger generation of police officers pushing for more technology, or is it the older, some of the inspectors who are blocking it?
I would say the real change in the last 2 years, it's definitely coming from the majority of our organisation, but across the new officers and the younger ones who are seeing technology at home and everywhere in their life, whether you're using Amazon at home to put the heating on, etc. And now the demand is vastly stripping what we can supply in terms of the affordability, the capacity of our IT teams. So we're having to really prioritise and be clear about what's important, you know, consolidating our big platform approaches, trying to decommission lots of legacy, and legacy is a real problem for police forces with sheer volumes of data, but to be really clear about where we get the best transformation and benefits from the new IT.
I mean, that thing about legacy as well. In fact, Ian Caldecott has just put in a question saying about building bespoke implications as well as got implications for NATS testing. When the ESN is live, and it may be a barrier for organisations to transition their mobile data, is that an issue around mobile data, Richard?
So one of the challenges I think that's being raised there is that with ESN you will have a dedicated, in effect, environment with the ESN network, which is a 4G, so it's a consistent platform with private, but it actually has a special encryption. And so if you want to run your app over that ESN network, then you have to get it accredited, because there's a risk, because it's also critical voice as well as data. If there's any app that suddenly sucks up, for example, all the bandwidth and the critical voice doesn't work, then that would be a problem. So the network, the providers have to accredit the apps. So yes, the accreditation is going to be a requirement, but fundamentally, I'd be astounded if anyone could write an app that could suck up all the voice bandwidth. You know, it's
going to be a barrier that can be got over.
It's not going to be a barrier. It's going to be it's a sort of an accreditation hurdle. You know, have to get accredited, but I'd be astounded if anyone had to rewrite any of their apps to meet that accreditation.
I've got another question coming in actually about looking at some of the commodity and bespoke. So Richard Davis from Hertfordshire, he's saying, why don't forces invest more in working together around user experience? And I mean, it's a very valid point, but obviously this is kind of what you're trying to address at the moment. And how much user experience and focus on the end user design is going on, and can that be core, common and commoditised? Jules?
I think that's happening on a number of levels at the moment. I mean, nationally, with a requirements group that are looking, with senior police officers across all the forces, looking at the functionality, the business benefits that are required. Locally, there's a real push to forces working in regions as well, with solutions such as the Athena product across the Eastern region, where it was put together by the 7 forces with key contributors in each operational area and standard business processes and shared data. So that is starting to happen, but again, a long way to go.
I think Jules is right. I mean, there are some things we're experiencing within the Enablers programme is we're starting to talk to individual forces, but we're trying to talk to regional groups because of that strength that they're looking to move information around within a region where there are already collaborative units, and try and get to sort of look at their own infrastructure. And for example, you don't need a SharePoint environment per force and an exchange. You could have one between 6 of you or 4 of you or 5 of you, and some of that conversation is being had. But I think we're at a kind of a cusp of, well, we don't want to take that because we're halfway through something we'd already started. And there's still a bit of that going on. It's not quite the not invented here, it's just people invest an awful lot of time, an awful lot of energy, and a lot of personal sort of energy into building something, and then something comes sort of sweeping in from the side that almost knocks it out and say, well, we're not having that. And I found that in sort of collaboration with Beds, Cams and Hearts in the Eastern region. The old sort of saying of how do you get to London? Well, I wouldn't start from here. If everyone was on a complete clean sheet, you would design things utterly differently from what we've got now. And I think we have to recognise that over a few years there's going to be a period of accommodation where people start to think more about shared business processes along collaboration and what is the most effective way of doing it. And out of that, I think, will come some of the groupings. We're certainly, within the programme, looking at sharing work that we're doing with the new technology in our pilot forces and saying, okay, this is what your business process might look like. And we're passing that around all the others.
Jules, are you in one of those pilot forces? Are you working with Simon
Yes.
and
Yes, we are.
the enabling programme? So you're doing that.
So two of the pilot forces closely involved.
So how does that work in practice?
We work very closely with the national team, the National Enabling Programme, and it's about having one technical design and one IT platform for workplace productivity, Office 365, applying to all forces, standard cost model and contract, but then allowing forces to explore for their own environments what works best in terms of business transformation and getting rid of some of the real tired old ways of working and duplicating data and using the technology to make that more efficient. But I think, as Simon said, we're all in very different places, so it would be unreal to expect that every force could just adopt one way of working. So we need to work out from where we are and improve.
Could I just jump in there, because I think it's intriguing when you have these kind of programs. How do you get the governance working so you make sure that if somebody does take a really good leap forward, everybody gets carried with it? Because otherwise you could end up with kind of multiple directions going at once, and then you have some people working on 2 or 3 steps to get to where somebody got in one.
Yeah, I suppose the answer's on a postcard because
Sorry.
as you would expect, it is the question. One of the challenges around this is there's no such thing as British policing. There are 43 to 50 independent sort of loose cooperatives, really, if you like, where people sort of are ploughing their own furrow and have different senses of priorities. And as I said, not just with the technology, people will work really hard to get somewhere. The 2 strands to that, we are trying to build a change network across the country, and as we move into more a delivery phase from a design phase, sort of towards the end of this summer, we want to start sharing that best practice and saying, look, this one's already been done. And one of the benefits, and it comes back to the sort of the key questions about commoditisation, is you don't have to rekey it. You just bring it in and install it. Yep. So we think that will speed up the process of standardisation of standard processes, because we have standard processes. Most of what policing does, to a certain extent, is governed by law or practice or code of practice from the College of Policing, but we can still find 43 different ways of doing it, sometimes inside 2 forces. But having standard technology where everyone's got the same tool that they're using, I think will allow us over time to say, look, somebody's built one of these already, you can have it. And I think that is going to be a big bonus over the next year or so. And also in terms of my own particular programme that I work on, linking into the other things that Richard alluded to, but to wrap in these things, that the enabling programme becomes a bed in which you can put all the other national programmes that are going on and access things. And I think we will get a simplified landscape. It won't ever be one way of doing it, but I would expect in 3 to 5 years there will be many, many fewer ways, because people will sort of borrow with pride, and the IT company doing its job as Ian wants it to do going forward will pick this up and just hand it out.
Yeah. I mean, there has been, they're going to tender for a national Office 365 implementation or whichever. The question I've got though is it really off the shelf? Can you just take that, drop it in, or do they need to work on it? Jules?
Pretty much so in terms of how you apply it technically and the usability, but the big challenge for policing is around the security. We have to be so much more secure than other industries, consumer technology, etc. So, for example, our standard Windows 10 bill for policing has, I think, 1,200 configuration changes from the one you buy from PC World.
Actually, that's quite reassuring, to be honest.
It is, yeah. But, so I think some of the challenges around putting Office 365 and storing police data on the cloud is a big move. It hasn't been done previously for open information such as email. So we do have to ensure there are standards in place and that we're doing it once, not 43 times around that. But I think once you've got beyond that and moved to how you use it, no, it's commodity and shouldn't be different.
Chris, do you agree with that?
Totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And the beauty of the cloud is that gives you the opportunity to do it once rather than 43 times, actually. Get the security piece right, which is fundamentally important. Absolutely agree. And then you can go down to local level of configuration around the dare I say, frills and furbelows that you feel need to be slightly different to next door. But the core is there. Yeah.
How easy is it to do that? I mean, is that part of the plan, Richard? Is that...
Well, yeah, and as Simon said, the big challenge we've had is around the governance of this kind of approach, which is that every force instinctively wants to do their own thing. However, if you can make it so that it's much easier and simpler for them and lower cost for them to take a national solution that's consistent, then they will take it and they will go for it with open arms. But it is unfortunately, it is that sort of collective willpower you have to get agreement on, and you have to basically get everybody aligned, and then and when I say everybody, if you can get the vast majority, then I think the outliers will come along as well, because they can just see that's the way everything is going. But somehow I'm sure we'll end up with some force somewhere that decides not to do Office 365. It wouldn't at all surprise me.
But surely the benefits of you all being on the same platform, Simon, how do you get all of them to join in?
I mean, there are 2 or 3 ways. I mean, in an individual force, you just sort of you just make it compliance. I mean, I got rid of hundreds of printers to stop people printing things, and the ones we had left I put on the top floor of buildings in cupboards. So you just, you do some physical things like that. But in terms of getting forces to move to a platform, there are two ways. One of the levers, of course, is the security. And the national CSIRO is saying this is how it will be done and this is how it will be built, and this is the only way you can move to cloud. So that's one side from inside policing. There is the straightforward financial argument that over time everything is going to move to cloud. On premises from the big providers is gone because it's too expensive for them. It's not a business model they're going to sustain anywhere in the world, let alone just in one police force in where pick a small county and say everywhere in the world's going on cloud, but we'll keep running a team that will help you manage your file servers and so on your own installation. That's not going to happen. So standing still is not an option because it's going to go, and Microsoft have said this, it's not in their business model, and nobody else is going to have it in their business model. So you've got the inside saying you can go to cloud, it is secure, and here are all these benefits. And in the end, it's the job of us in the programme. And as soon as our willing volunteers with Jules and her team, who've gallantly gone forward pushing this through, as soon as we can get the technology in and delivering, the best marketing of all will happen, which is police forces looking sideways at their neighbour, saying, I didn't realise you could do that. And the benefits are in there. And there are other levers in there. We're talking to the HMI about looking at delivering some of these tools and working with them as part of the appeal inspection process going forward, so they can say, look, you could be doing this. Why aren't you? So it's a multi-strand
So
attack.
If you can find, absolutely. If you can
Yeah.
find those operational benefits, because we can talk about efficiency and all those things are nice, but if there's some real clear operational benefits, and the big one for me, I think, is around sharing of data, and police forces are constantly having to deal with other agencies, and by that I mean local authorities, the care system, and there's a lot of data that has to get shared. Now, actually, today they find that very difficult to do, and so you'll end up taking a laptop and you'll show somebody another, this is the information we've got on this person, or they have to do it that kind of way because they can't share data electronically for a variety of reasons. Some of them are technical and some of them are sort of business and cultural. But with this sort of approach, when police is using a very standard common technology, Office 365, and it allows them to then share that information much more easily because you can create shared space on the cloud, you can allow somebody to have access to information. So now you can do that remote sharing. It will make the ability to operate so much easier, and I think that's what will really sell this.
Just bringing in a question from Nick Ashton, is you, because you're talking about the Microsoft Cloud, Office 365, and that, yes, I understand the logic of that, but it's a question he's got here. He said, are we basing all apps on both platforms? If it's on Apple, are there issues with iOS updates? Where do you stand on platforms? Is it going through a Microsoft platform, or will you allow Apple apps? Who would like to answer that?
At the moment, the approved design is through Microsoft. However, and again, there's a difference between what you might call an Apple on a desktop and an Apple phone. It is not impossible to use Microsoft Office tools on an Apple device. So you can do that. So we're trying to get away from, provided it's secure and provided the mobile device management is in place, you can use what device you like, because inside the National Enablers Programme is a tool which controls the information at an application level on your mobile device. So you could have anything you like on the rest of your iPhone, but you cannot move information from inside the NEP environment, if you like, just to paraphrase, out. You can't cut and paste out of a Word document and put it into your own Facebook account. You won't be able to do that. So if forces have an Apple investment, they will be able to use NEP tools. But the design is inside a Microsoft environment for storage, because that is where the security assessment has been done, that's where the national risk assessment has been done, and that's where the national CSIRO, said Ian Dyson, the Commissioner of the City, has said these are the risk management, this is risk management, these are the controls, and provided you can comply with these controls, you can use it here. Now, that's not to say that other cloud platforms won't move on in the future. I would suggest they do, but this is a specific tool set. And I think we need to try and work. We are working with a tool set that is at a global enterprise level. And there is nothing that we have seen in the programme that matches the breadth of this tool set. Now, Office 365 to most of us feels like PowerPoint, Word and email. But at a corporate, enterprise level, it is massively secure, as Chris was saying. The tools on it are incredible. But also, there are something like 18 to 20 different pieces of software that come as part of this bucket that allow you to do things with information. And that's where we're trying to get the message. I don't know of another enterprise platform that allows the flexibility, the ability to dynamically translate, for example, that is going to come in, and we're in a way of contacting our communities. All those sorts of things all sit inside an ecosystem that policing already understands, because policing already runs its enterprise and its email and its identity management inside Microsoft. Well, it's one of the reasons we don't want to pick up and say, I'll tell you what, this is a big enough change as it is. Not only that, we're going to change the operating system.
Chris, would you agree? Are all those tools there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the beauties of buying a globally recognised, effectively commoditised platform now. You've got all of that investment has gone into it. Loads of people are using it for all sorts of highly complex business operations. So why not kind of surfing on the back of that wave, as it were? And I think that's exactly what you just said. Yep. Absolutely, particularly the security access piece, which you can create shared environments, you can control access. Therefore, that exchange of information with local authorities, so you can protect vulnerable citizens, really important. Always been a challenge. It could be a load easier. I think at the end of it all, I would imagine relatively rapidly, people will see the kind of business operational improvements, and people will forget about kind of any technology question, really. That's the whole thing with digital. It's really about, so what's the business outcome and the disruption and the improvement?
Yeah.
And suddenly the whole world of policing feels a lot easier than maybe it feels right here, right now, I would suggest.
The thing I would add on all that is it's still really important to get back to the kind of open APIs and the standards, because whilst we're talking about classic sort of office environment applications, and by that I mean not necessarily Microsoft Office, but an office, people want to send information around. There is still the fundamental tools that police will use around investigation, crime recording, crime reporting, analytics on that data. And those will be solutions and tools that they'll use separate from that Office 365 platform. But this is where it comes back to the importance of standards, because if you can have open APIs and you can have standards, then you can start to transfer data between these. So you might do a bunch of analytics, and then you might want to create out of that a report that you send to someone. Then you want to have that ability to transfer data between and engage between the different applications.
No, I really agree with that. And policing is a fragmented landscape in terms of technology solutions. So we've got a number of solutions such as Office 365, which is global enterprise standard, solutions in the Home Office which are there for policing. You can't decide not to use PND or PNC or the replacement for that NLEBS, you do. But for a number of policing systems, such as the main operational solutions, there's still a wide choice on the market, or people have developed them in-house, and less than there used to be. And I think the competition's healthy there, but what it does mean is for the main records management solutions for policing, there are about 3 or 4 suppliers out there, and currently they're not very good at speaking to each other and sharing data across those solutions. So that's a big piece of development for the future, and working with the NEP.
Yeah. One of the things that most interests me about this is what we're doing now takes us in 5 to 10 years' time. Because it touches on one of Richard's points very early on about CRM. Actually, most of the big systems involved in policing, if you really thought about it, could be done by a commercial CRM system. You could run your command and control, because that's what people do when they've got the AA will have a CRM
So you think
system.
command and control, you could run that in
You
a
could run that with
CRM.
You could run that because it's about gathering information. It's about assessing it. It's about saying what do we already know. You could also run a
That's
crime
not going to
investigation.
please the big suppliers of command and control.
I don't care.
systems.
As you know, I never have cared.
Just pointing out, I think that's a really good thing.
But there are 2 or 3 very brief points. Firstly, actually, we take information and we do things with it, and we apply business rules to decide what happens to it. All of that exists inside of a carefully configured CRM system. We have fragmented our business. We've got command and control. We get things in there. Some of those are incidents, some of those are investigations. They're all investigations. They just need rules writing around them. That investigation might lead, as Richard said earlier, into somebody in custody. Well, actually, that's just another piece of business process. All of that could exist around a carefully considered CRM system. And if you do that nationally, you can move information around the country, and we can start to deal with cross-border investigations into the most vulnerable, where we've got teenage girls being taken across a border and being abused sexually. And at the moment, we have no way of checking where they're missing from because there is no national register. Well, all you need to do is say, what do we know about this person? And you start to think about how the information can move when you've got a commoditised base. And say, well, how does everyone else do this? Because there is no industry in the country that says, tell you what, we've got 43 different shots and they're not going to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And with commodity, you can do that. You can find out, I haven't got a pair of shoes in this Marks & Spencer's, but there's one down the road, I can get them ordered here today. Well, if you think of that as a piece of information about a vulnerable person or somebody you've got in custody that was arrested a day ago, what did they say? What photograph did they give in custody? Is this the person who was arrested 2 days ago? Even though they're giving us the same name and date of birth, let's have a photograph from there and let's look at it now. And that's what commodity does to you, because you create the borderless information that business already has.
I mean, that's an interesting. So actually, another question that came again from Richard Davis at Hertfordshire Constabulary. He's asking about why forces repeatedly allow suppliers to hold them ransom when they're on bespoke issues. And actually, I heard this yesterday in local government. A number of guys complaining about how they had this fantastic idea in social care, but the business case was great, but the supplier was going to charge the same again just for the API into their system. Now that you've got legacy, you can't avoid the legacy. How are you going to get past that? How are you going to make them open up their APIs? And I'm looking at you, Richard, because I think that's your role, isn't it?
I don't know about my role, but we're certainly at the forefront of some of these challenges. And I think you're right, there is a big legacy problem out there. And again, frankly, unfortunately, the commercial nous of police forces and the Home Office procurement in the past has not always been good. So we've ended up with contracts where policing have given away things like IP, so the supplier has all the IP on the product, and then when you want any change, the police unfortunately have to pay for anything, and so all that kind of stuff. And that's why I do come back to that commercial aspect, which is we're looking to define now and set up some commercial rules and principles. And this is where I think the Police ICT Company can play a great role around defining those standard commercial terms and conditions, which would include things like open APIs and including things like the IP being owned, the intellectual property being owned by police. And that way you can then start to overcome some of these issues. Because we saw that in the Met where we had vendors who basically we were beholden to, and when we wanted a minor change, they would charge us charge us a lot of money, and we had nothing we could do, we had to pay it.
But we brought that upon ourselves. I think policing did
we
it
did.
ourselves. We were
We did.
totally unintelligent clients,
Yeah.
and the IT suppliers and vendors aren't out there to be a charity for policing. They make business out of us. But I think, and Chris will vouch, it is changing now. We're working very closely with partners rather than suppliers, and looking at the common standards that Simon and Richard have mentioned.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, the whole point of this conversation about do you go for a commodity platform is all about getting a whole lot of functionality that's been invested in and built already anyway, which you can use, which is very different from a build me a bespoke one, go away, scratch your head, think about it and start from scratch. Why, in the modern world, that's not how we work. And you'll inevitably come up therefore with a different commercial model because you have to. You're buying on behalf of 43 forces.
The only thing, again, coming back to the challenge to all this is the ability to deliver nationally solutions, which up to now has been very poor, patchy. Yes. So we have a very poor track record, and I think again, if I was a chief constable and I was looking at, Richard, you're selling me this great national solution. But is it going to arrive in 2 years' time? Is it going to do what you said it was going to do? I think this is where the challenge for us comes, is we've got to start delivering some of these solutions, and then I think we'll get the confidence, because up to now our track record has been poor.
I think Chris touched on this a little bit earlier about why some of the national systems have been a problem, and I think he used the phrase the 80-20 rule. And I think some national systems have been over-spec'd and bespoked to death by groups of very well-intentioned, this is not a well-intentioned experts who are looking at their piece of this business and saying, right, I need to absolutely ensure that whatever happened in the past is continued. And there have been some conversations in LEDs around how that happens and what might happen around certain functionality in LEDs, the replacement for PNC, P&D. And instead of sort of dialing out a little bit and saying, well, why? What is that function there for? Can we do it another way? People said, no, it has to be built in like this. So I think we need to stop over-bespoking the past and creating new digital versions of old processes, and start to look forward and say, what do we actually need? And then I think we will start to get simpler procurement, which means it's probably a lot easier to deliver something that works for everybody. But I also think, and I think this is definitely happening, listening to former colleagues and people who are now sort of chiefs, people get the fact that you can't afford to have your own car built. You buy one off a production line and it does the job for you. And I think policing, the market is changing as well as the providers on that. And saying, well, it's not quite what I would have done, but I can't afford to go and buy my own one anymore from scratch. There's just so many noughts on that.
Jules, do you think that's a fair comment? I mean, is that shift happening, do you think, on the ground?
It is, yes, and I think that's actually exacerbated by the fact that forces are under increasing financial constraints, and where they do have money, it needs to be prioritised on, replenishing police officer numbers. So the technology is vital, but you can't afford to do it 43 times over. So compromise has to be made, and that's a hard lesson culturally, I think, for policing to understand. And the added complexity, I think, of police and crime commissioners as well. They perform a very valid function, but they are, by the role and nature of what they do, locally focused, not nationally.
That's an interesting point, actually, because yes, that's bringing local politics into the mix as well. Is that causing divergence or convergence? Richard, you're nodding, and then I can pick up Simon.
So we in terms of the national programmes, we work very closely with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and what we do is we share with them the status of the programmes, we share with them the challenges the programmes are facing, to make sure they truly understand the complexity and the importance of these programmes to policing, because exactly as Jules said, very often they will take a very parochial local view. But equally, I think the good news is they are increasingly becoming much more aware of the importance of having national solutions, and they also get the point Simon's made about why would you allow your force to do things locally when actually there may be something that's better or available elsewhere. Why wouldn't you just take that? So they're keen to start to push that agenda. So I think we're getting there, but there is certainly communications and
I mean, certainly one thing that can happen in local authorities is with obviously council members as the local political side, is that quite often you have people who don't understand technology, and yes, they're all focused on the housing, local bins, etc., but they don't get the technology. Do you think that the police and crime commissioners, are they on board with the and chief constables with the importance of technology? Jules, you're looking really keen to put in there.
Sorry, so I've got two very supportive police and crime commissioners across my two forces who fully embrace technology and understand what it can do.
Is that the norm, do you think?
Probably not.
Or are you just lucky?
I've got lucky, I think, but speaking to colleagues, no, it's not the same all across.
I think there is a mixed economy here. There are some chiefs who have been brought up with touchscreens, and there are others who can remember their first remote control, which is the sort of position I was in. And you've got that everywhere, and you've got that right across commissioners. But some of this is about how you choose to pass the message. And I know, Richard, we've talked with some of the roadshows in the past that we do around the country. So talking to commissioners, what we've been doing in the programme is, wherever we're going, we actually sort of distill out what are your priorities in your police and crime plan. And we don't talk about the technology, we actually talk about how you're going to deliver that then. Because there are about 7 things that are common across every police and crime plan. And it's to do with trying to find money to do new threats. It's to do with protecting the vulnerable. Digital comes up, technology comes up, but there often isn't anything underneath it which says, well, exactly what are you going to do with technology that will allow you to protect the vulnerable? So a lot of the messaging is about, if you spend a bit of money here inside this environment, you can do all those other things. One of the challenges around the business cases, and I think Jules will recognise this, is that people think, well, that's technology, and that's office technology. And one of the things I was going to make, and it's coming back to a point that Richard made, is what the technology that the enabling programmes are bringing in is it's for the first time bridging what was originally operational technology over there, internal technology over here. So you've got office stuff and you've got work stuff. We're now saying you can use office technology to work, and you can save money doing it. And that's where I sort of make the point about the apps being significant, because you can put an individual app that says, I'm going to do stop and search. We'll point that into a piece of office technology. And so actually what you're doing there is going into here, and that's where it's stored and managed. And equally, you can build digital case files that will work inside a Microsoft environment if you choose to. So what we're trying to do is say you're not spending a load more money on licensing. You're actually investing in all the business processes your organisation needs to change to save you money, to keep the public safer within financial constraints. And that is a really tough argument, but it is working. People are getting it. And it sounds awful. We just need to explain it a bit, because we're used to thinking of office stuff and operational stuff, and we're saying, no, it's just information.
Yeah. And for me, the worst case scenario would be if we put in this wonderful new commodity-based technology and we carry on with the same business processes that we've been using since.
And it's really expensive licensing. It's really expensive licensing.
And we don't change the way we do things, and we'll have failed then, which is why the business transformation approach is so important.
Chris, that point about the licensing and actually what you can do with it, that's a really interesting point. So the licensing itself is you pay once, but get the most out of it.
Absolutely, maximising the technology. I mean, it's quite interesting, the whole kind of discussion. It all, to my mind, is focused on, so what's the business outcome you want to get to? How do you improve policing? In the same way that the installation of productivity tools, because these are workplace productivity tools we're talking about, in any other environment has really been, it disappears into the background because it just becomes part of the routine, in the same way that, electricity, nobody thinks, how does electricity work now? They're not interested in how electricity works. You turn on the light and the lights come on. And it's this, ultimately, this kind of workplace productivity tooling should be in exactly the same kind of place. It should just be something that enables you to work quicker, easier, and whatever, and it disappears into the background and becomes intuitive, and you just crack on. But the critical thing, I think, is in doing that, when you do come down to configuring and tailoring for particular business processes, and right back at the start I said, there are always written processes, but there's always the informal processes. You need to get all of those captured and improved, and if the informal process is there to get around something that got you to do one bit of paper, to do another bit of paper, to do a third bit of paper, just don't replicate that. There's absolutely no point replicating that. You need to have enough kind of broad thought to say, how are we going to improve the way we can look after vulnerable people who might be mistreated across county lines, for example. So it's all about the information, which is like the electricity that flows through the system, really.
So you talk about the informal processes that go on at the moment. Secure messaging is used across policing now, probably by 90% of operational cops.
When you say secure messaging, do you mean
WhatsApp?
WhatsApp.
I would imagine. Since you've asked. But I would expect that to be going on. So not an official police. So it's not because they don't have the ability to just quickly fizz information round to people. No, I'm not suggesting there is anything improper in that. It's just that it's secure messaging and it can't be, it's encrypted. And it's stuck somewhere in a server that would take a Supreme Court justice to open in the States. So what we're saying is, okay, you need to message. That's fine. Let's bring it inside the environment.
Absolutely.
And let's make it auditable and trackable, and we can find it if we need to again. And that's another thing you say. It's an informal process. It's not subversive. It is cops and others finding a convenient and easy and quick way and secure way to do what they need to do. Are you at this job? Yes. Can you get there? Can't get it on the airwave. How do you message someone? Well, if we give them something that is as easy to use, they will use it, because a lot of the informal processes are not to subvert things, they're to get the job done easier and quicker. And what we're trying to do is provide the tools that, you know what, touch that twice, and it's secure, and and it's protecting you. Because if anybody says, what was in that message, you can say, I was checking, can you see the back door from where you are? And that element of protection, as opposed to saying, what was in that, who was in that WhatsApp group, and what were you saying, and what pictures did you share? There is an element of protection here as well. You can bring the informal into the formal if you buy the right stuff and make it work.
It's the audit, it's the protection for the individuals concerned, performing their duties, all of that, absolutely. And that just kind of the ability to use instant messaging just as a productivity tool is incredible. The things it saves you having to do.
Yep.
When you think back many years, you'd have got somebody to type out a memo to send to somebody who would have got somebody to type out a memo to send back to you. We need to move away from that and recognise the benefits that we can get now.
One quick question before we move away from that whole kind of licensing issue and all that you get within that.
Yep.
You mentioned Skype and translation earlier on. Is that included within Office 365? Is that one of the things that would just come?
You're asking a very precise question.
I am, because I'm loving that idea of the translation.
I cannot actually answer
the translation.
Inside the NEP build, for example, if you had a critical incident inside a town, you can place on your website or by email, or so people can just click on a link, because you don't have to install Skype to be able to see it. So one of the tools that will come is the ability, for example, for a local inspector or a chief officer or whoever it is, whoever is appropriate, to speak to their town or their community. And at the moment, I think it's limited, it's either 15 or 20, but at the same time...
20, 15 or 20 what?
Languages, I'm getting there.
Okay,
15 or 20, you can choose to have that speech translated into text in the language of your choosing. And that's using Microsoft Translate.
Do you use regional dialects at all?
I don't think Microsoft's gone quite that far.
Have you got Welsh?
But when you look, Peterborough, when I was up there, had 117 languages. Now, many of our towns will have 30, 40, 50 languages.
And the interpretation costs are huge. And if you could wipe those out with a tool...
Well, you can, and there are things you can buy that will sort of add on. You could put Microsoft Translate on a mobile device, so that if you just do your first conversation with somebody in the street for whom English isn't a first language, and it can be captured, and then it can be used. You may want a formal translation later if it's evidential, but those are the sorts of tools that just come in like this. But the ability to address a community in a language it understands, as opposed to them needing to get someone to translate for them, and it's immediate, and you just do it with a web link on your webpage.
And I think what's exciting for me is these kind of tools, when you give them to officers, they'll find ways of using them creatively, but for good purposes, for good policing purposes. And again, that's why I come back to the Commissioners 100 and getting young officers and forward-thinking officers to think about how they can use the technology. Because, and one of the interesting things was, we said when we gave them the iPad minis, just let them tell us what apps they would like to use. And they wanted to use things like Google Translate and so on, because they know that, the senior officers know that if they give the younger officers the opportunity, they will find ways of helping solve police problems that the senior officers would never have thought of.
And once we get past that first 20 minutes, if we're talking about Microsoft Office in this case, I mean, there are other things that we can talk about.
Of course,
we'll talk about
there
Microsoft
are
Office.
other brands available.
There are, just not in our programme. but in terms of going back to the security. But when we get past the first 15-20 minutes, this is not about a new way of doing PowerPoint, and we start to talk about things like Microsoft Teams, we talk about sharing, we talk about controls you can put on that. The officers are ripping their arms and saying, well, we need this now. And we've got prototypes that we're looking at in West Yorkshire about multi-agency sharing hubs, and they're saying this is going to save the equivalent of 2 people's jobs a year.
We have got only about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to rush on, but actually that leads me on to a great question that's come in from Lee in Caldecott. Incident exchange between forces, a massive issue for policing nationally. Where's this heading? So this is coming back to information exchange. How do you share data with forces, across place, with other organisations?
I think incident exchange, if he's talking about switching between command and control systems, that is probably still a few years ahead. Except there are instances across the country, and we did it in Bedcam's Hearts, where we paid and we ended up with 1 instance because of our collaborations. So at the moment, it's a kind of almost a physical lift and shift with the original supplier. But as if, Richard and I have talked about this again in the past, one of the things that I would see in the future is a standard incident management system, small s, across the country that would allow you to move information. If a car's sort of heading between going up motorway at 120 miles an hour, how do you move that through the Midlands? I would see that being something that should be the ambition, that you commoditise that and say, okay, you just hand it off to a new controller who's got a geographic responsibility.
And what about data sharing? I mean, I hate to mention GDPR, but of course all the data laws are changing. How does that impact the police? Or are you immune to all of that?
No.
Absolutely
not.
Police is there's a very specific angle on the law related to policing. So policing is exempt in a number of ways, because obviously you can't release information that might be prejudicial to a court case or things like that, or an investigation. You can't release police intelligence. But there are other areas where policing is very much required to respond, and so police is taking a lot of putting a lot of effort into this whole process. They've got a big team looking at it and understanding exactly how the law applies, the GDPR regulation applies to policing. So yes, there's a lot going on, but it will impact policing.
Is that part of your landscape mapping?
It's not formally part of the landscape mapping. It's part of something that the what's called the Information Management and Operational Requirements Coordination Committee
Why
runs.
is the police so great at snappy titles? I mean, it's full of snappy titles, isn't it? Not.
But
We love acronyms.
It is part, and one of the reasons for some of the sort of slightly increased price components in NEP is because they come with better controls on data and that responsibility. At the moment, if you hand another organisation information about an individual, you have no tools with which to control it. You don't know what they've done with it, pretty much. Within the NEP is the ability where you share in cloud, you put controls on it, and you can automatically delete in 6 months. So there are tools built into the product set. Where we have an issue is with history, and we and others, and the team that Richard's talking about are speaking to the Information Commissioner's Office. GDPR does apply, but it becomes much more manageable if you have it only digital. It's only stored once, and you give people different levels of access, and you can set those access controls automatically, and then kind of forget about them, because the system will just delete or move or remove access as and when. So there is a slight admin burden, but it's much less of a burden than trying to backtrack over who had that file when.
Which again is why it's so important that we continue to upgrade, refresh and invest in new technology, because the requirements are changing all the time through legislation, etc. And as good as some of our old systems are, they're never going to be able to provide that level of functionality, so it would be pointless to just try and build on them, but move to the new.
The software as a service model, of course, means it's just fixed once by the provider.
And in fact, that leads me on to kind of one of the last topics that I was keen to get in, so that's great. We're going to get it in before we've got 5 minutes. Of the technologies, you talk about future-proof or moving forwards, etc. So you've got software as a service, evergreen technology. But what are the new technologies coming down the line that you think will have the biggest impact on policing? And I just want to say that I saw the most amazing demo of HoloLens on crime scene management.
Is that the Black Marble?
It's the Black Marble one, and it's your old force that's been playing with it. And I was actually, I have to admit, I was kind of blown away by actually using a commodity HoloLens type thing to do something quite so impressive.
It's quite special. That piece of that is, they're the company that built our mobile app, and they're looking at 2 or 3 particular apps. There's also a virtual control room that you can do, because you can squeeze and pull. You can actually create a virtual
control room
for a major
Minority
incident.
Report.
Well, not that sort of control. Actually managing a major incident, but doing having it in a box.
Things
but yeah, just because of the way it works. And I think virtual reality has an enormous future inside policing, particularly with training. The scenario training, because if you're doing firearms training, for example, and you're going to search a building, in the end you know the building like the back of your hand. But actually I think VR has a huge potential to reduce costs and improve the value of training in policing. That's one thing. I think biometrics is somewhere where we are going to go as we continue to understand the kind of ephemeral nature of identity. How do you prove who somebody really is? Because a name's no good anymore.
No.
Gender can change. Age people can lie about.
Your DNA can't change.
Exactly, and that's where you end up with some interesting conversations in a 21st century liberal democracy about who knows what about you. But I think general biometric recognition. I mean, there's some fascinating stuff in China at the moment where obviously different rules apply, but fascinating stuff about facial recognition in a crowd in China.
Quickly, guys, Jules, what do you think is a big technology coming down the line?
Really getting a better grip on big data and open source. There's so much information out there now about every individual, and it's really hard for policing to keep a grip on it, but there's some great new technologies coming out there which can put it together across the Internet of Things, and we haven't really scratched the surface on that yet.
Chris?
Internet of Things, so connection up to all the sensors and devices that are out and about all around the world, I think will be really important going forward. But actually, with the platform that you're putting in, something like robotic process automation at some point will become fundamental, I would have thought, for some of the routine processes.
Yeah, so along those lines, artificial intelligence, machine learning is going to have a big role to play. If you look at the amount of data police has, actually, for me, one of the big frustrations I feel with policing is that we just haven't joined up the data, exactly as Simon described, across police border boundaries, and across all the different data sets that police has access to. They are not joined up at all. But if you started to join those up, and then you started applying artificial intelligence, machine learning to that data, you could start to really pull out some very, very interesting analytics around why somebody is moving from one location to another on a frequent basis. You can track their vehicle movements, their phone records, you can track who they talk to and their contacts, and you could start to build up this picture of this person sounds like he could be the Mr. Big in a serious organised crime organisation or in a child trafficking or whatever, and those are the people we need to apprehend.
There's an interesting one, a conversation there linked with what you're saying about in a liberal society. I can imagine there'd be lots of debate over that, over infringement of civil liberties, etc. But we don't have time to explore that one any further right now. What I do have, though, time for is last comments. Can we make digital policing a reality by the 2025 vision? Richard, you're smiling.
I'm an optimist. I do think that what police forces and crime commissioners we mentioned about chief constables will see is the power of this. We build up the roadshows, we paint a picture of how all these technologies will come together by 2025, a scenario of somebody getting attacked, and how all the different solutions that are being provided and built now will come together. And it's very, very powerful. And at the end of it, I think that people go and they go, yes, that is what we want to achieve, and we believe we can get there. So absolutely.
Last thoughts, Chris?
Absolutely. I'd be astonished if the business benefits didn't didn't make the case so obvious that it just kind of rolled out, because everybody expects it in the rest of their life. Absolutely, yeah.
I really believe it will happen. And most importantly, it's happening through a coalition of the willing. It hasn't happened because of mandation from the government, and you could argue the pros and cons of that, but progress is being made.
Simon?
Yeah, this is an idea whose time has come, and it is now inevitable. It won't be as fast as many of us would like, but it will happen, and it will change policing, and it will change the police's relationship with the public.
Thank you very much. Simon Parr, Jules Donald, Chris Doutney, Richard Thwaite. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for watching us at home or in your office. And hopefully you'll join us again for the next UK Live. Details will be available shortly. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.